The first analysis video I ever did on this channel was for Evoland, an indie game created during a game jam that explored the growth of RPGs from the NES to the PlayStation era. It borrowed gameplay and story elements from Final Fantasy and The Legend of Zelda, with nods to several other classic franchises. While I admired what Evoland tried to do, and it had a certain charm to it, I couldn't help but feel like there were a lot of misguided choices that tripped it up. So naturally, when I heard they were making a full-length sequel, I was intrigued. Outside of the time crunch of a game jam, would the team be able to pull off the affectionate parody they went for the first time? Well, just like its predecessor, I bought Evoland 2 and played it to completion. Would you like to know the difference between the two games? 20 hours. There are a number of differences between the two games, but the most notable is certainly the sequel's length compared to the 3-hour original. Rather than swapping between action and RPG segments in a handful of levels, Evoland 2 is a full-length action RPG with a complete upgrade and leveling system. Since one of the biggest problems with the original game was the uselessness of leveling your characters after the halfway point, sticking to one core combat style gave a nice bit of focus to the gameplay. Of course, there are still segments that let you dip into other genres for a bit. A rhythm game, a Bejeweled clone, a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and there's even a pretty lengthy strategy section. Compared to its predecessor, Evoland 2 is much more fully featured. For example, there's a collectible card game here too, but compared to the original, it takes much longer to get every card and beat every opponent. The card game actually isn't really balanced in a way that I feel is fair, but it is optional, so I don't feel it's right to harp on it too much. What I really want to talk about today is what I feel Evoland 2 has in common with the original, which I think is its biggest weakness. It positions itself as a parody, but it has nothing to say. Evoland focused on the evolution of games as a cute little gimmick, but ultimately that's all it wound up being. A gimmick. The rest of the game was filled with jokes that were more or less observational humor without the punchline. I chalked most of this up to the fact that the entire script and the game was made over the course of a couple days. I can't really rip on an indie studio not writing a masterpiece in 2 days when it took me 2 years to actually write this review, and it isn't creative or quality. However, I still think it's important to be honest about creative works. There's no shame in something not being perfect, and as long as the dialogue remains respectful, it can only encourage growth. Evoland 2 has a much more ambitious plot than the first game, and it takes more strides towards crafting an original story. Whereas the original gave us an extremely abridged version of the Final Fantasy VII plot, Evoland 2 spins a tale about time travel, while heavily borrowing from the android saga of Dragon Ball Z, for some reason. There are suddenly much longer dedicated cutscenes, and they're not very good. The writing leans heavily on cliches, and just sort of recycles tropes that we've seen in the medium since the beginning, and it doesn't really do anything to try and subvert these tropes or make fun of them. It just comes off as a very unoriginal story. I'm left feeling the same way I did with the first game. If you're going to parody something, you have to go hard. When you have a plot that can't deliver emotionally, parody is a great way to still make your story engaging and memorable. Parody isn't just referencing an existing property though, it's making a point. And just like the first time, this is where Evoland 2 falls short. When I think of parody or satire, the films of Mel Brooks come to mind. His body of work spoofs all sorts of genres, stories, and plot devices, and does so brilliantly. Blazing Saddles doesn't just point out that cowboys eat a lot of beans. It takes that stereotype, flips it on its head, and points out the consequences of this trope that we somehow hadn't thought of. And these tropes aren't just played off for laughs. Blazing Saddles also makes statements about our treatment of the Wild West in cinema. One of its most controversial and powerful messages is about how we idolize this era while kind of ignoring that it was rampantly racist and sexist.
What did you expect? Welcome, Sonny. Make yourself at home. Marry my daughter.
Both the comedy and the themes are driven by this idea of taking something we know well and subverting it. This is parody, and it's the step that Evoland sorely needs to take to hit its mark. For example, let's take a look at some of these side games. There's a section of the game where you need to defeat an entire village of ice dwarfs who are addicted to playing Bejeweled. If you want to clear all of them, it's going to take you a while. Not necessarily because there are a lot of them, but because it's not incredibly well designed or balanced and relies so much on luck. So the question, just like with the first Evoland, is why? Why is this here? There's no commentary or parody of the puzzle game genre, and it's just a not as successful version of a game that already exists. Why spend so long on these imitations or parodies of these already existing genres if it's not going to be as well executed as the games that it's riffing on, and it's not going to really supply any kind of commentary that you can learn or gain anything from? Even with the strategy game segment, which I think is one of the most successful parts of the game, it seems to lack a clear purpose. Even if it's fun, it's not as fun as it would be to play an actual Fire Emblem game. And with no commentary or unique perspective to take with you, all that you're really doing is playing worse versions of games that you could be playing instead. And then when it comes to the story, which has saved many a mediocre RPG, you're left with an aimless plot that hits every cliche we've seen with no real commitment and no unique spin. Even as a parody, Evoland 2 fails to say anything about the RPG genre or games as a whole. As open as I am to an irreverent story that takes the piss out of gaming conventions, there's none of that to be seen here. I don't really know what could have been done to fix it. It isn't a case like Sticker Star, where there's a clear goal hampered by conflicting design. Here, it just feels like the only goal was to make a game that references other games. Perhaps this is enough. I have friends who loved the original, but I have a hard time stating anything truly memorable about the series, and in my point of view, every work of art or entertainment should strive to make its mark. Even though Evoland 2 is an improvement in every technical aspect, it fails to make its own unique impression. I want this idea to work. The idea of examining the evolution of gaming as a medium is really exciting to me, and switching genres mid-game is a cool way to do it. I was hoping that with full development time and a chance to liberally apply some elbow grease, that cute novelty game born in a matter of days would evolve into a fun, fascinating look into the conventions of a hobby that's experienced rapid growth over the years. Unfortunately, it feels like more time was put into increasing the amount of the game's features, rather than establishing their purpose. And now that we've seen a recent influx in games that have mocked and openly discussed game design as part of the gameplay, Evoland's time to make a statement may have passed. Then again, maybe I'm just looking for a game that Evoland 2 was never meant to be. Hey everybody, thank you for listening. This is a video I've been needing to do for really a long time. It was asked about a long time ago, and I planned to do it a long time ago. And I'm finally whittling down my list. As always, you can find me over on Twitter and on Twitch, and if you'd like to support me doing more work like this, please check out my Patreon. And if you're new here, welcome. Here's some other videos that I'm pretty proud of that hopefully will convince you that I'm worth subscribing. Alright, have a good one, guys. Thank you.